I think one of the biggest lies we tell ourselves as humans is that evil always looks monstrous and scary, but in reality, this could not be further from the truth. Most of us like to imagine that no matter what, we will always choose good over evil, but history and culture has shown us otherwise, because people betray each other for love, they destroy each other for status, and they even humiliate each other in order to gain something. But what terrified me about The Good Eye by Jess Gibson is how mundane evil looks like. Because we always talk about how powerful good and love are, how they save us, how they transform us, how they heal us. But what about all the terrible things human beings do in order to get their own way, for their own desires? What about the grotesque things that we keep inside and we refuse to show? Hello, my gorgeous viewers and readers. Welcome back and welcome if you're new. I hope your weekend was filled with gothic summer evenings, dramatic outfits, and the slightly horrifying realization that human beings are capable of doing the most incredible tenderness and the most disgusting cruelty. Because today I want to talk about a book that unsettled me in the best way possible, which is The Good Eye by Jess Gibson. But before we start, I want to say a huge thank you to Penguin Random House Vintage for sending me this book and for allowing me to do this collaboration. This is a huge pleasure. This is my first collaboration with any brands, but more specifically with Penguin as well. So this feels like a huge compliment to someone who loves to ramble about books and about literature in my channel. I am so pumped and so excited. And as always, my review will be completely honest. Even if this is a collaboration, I will not lie here and tell you that I like this book if I didn't. So now, starting with the review, I was incredibly scared. I was terrified of reading this book and starting it because it was a collaboration. And in my head, I was thinking, oh, I know that this book was sent to me, and I know that this is a huge opportunity that people would pay for, right? Like at the end of the day, we're paying for reading books, right? So I was so scared of reading this book and not liking it, because I will have to come here into my YouTube channel and say that I did not like a book that I got for free, right? And I got a collaboration from. But honestly, the more I read this book, the more I realized that this was great. This was a great book to get introduced into horror, and more specifically into the morality of good and evil within humanity. And let me tell you why. Because if you have been following me for a while, you know that I love horror. The vast majority of the books that I review are either classics or are gothic horror themed, right? That is the genre that I prefer. And if you look at my shelf, I would say 60 to 70% of the books that I read are horror themed or are within the horror genre. And one of the things that I struggle with this genre is that I struggle to find good recommendations for people who want to enter into the genre, that want to get a little taste of horror and then just see if they like it or not, right? Because if you look at all the books, if you see like Tender is the Flesh or The Power or The Monk by Matthew Lewis, all these books are horror themed or are within the horror genre, but they are not beginner friendly at all when it comes into the genre. And this is where I think The Good Eye is a great recommendation, because you get the taste of horror or this horror genre, and more specifically what is great about horror, which is obviously the line between good and evil within humanity, but you don't get the taste of the disgusting sort of horror that many people within the genre like. Because what this book allows you to do is to get experience of this evil that horror loves to talk about. We see the insecurity, we see the jealousy, we see all these human emotions that create evil or that make someone be haunted by evil. And this is why I think this is a great recommendation for someone who wants to start into horror or who just wants to tone down the level of horror that they read. Let me show you why. Just as a quick summary, The Good Eye by Jess Gibson is a collection of dark stories where we see the ugliest sides of humanity. Across all stories, we encounter characters who are driven by envy, by jealousy, revenge, love, obsession, and all these kind of emotions and feelings that makes us show our ugliest sides. What makes these stories so interesting is that we see something very human and something apparently normal, because all the characters that we meet are they are haunted by a desire. They either want love, they seek validation, status, success. They are looking for something. They have a desire, and this desire is what haunts them into making something evil, into acting evil, or into making behaviors or doing behaviors that some people would see as morally wrong. And the most haunting part of all is the fact that we look at all these characters behaving erratically or acting out of their own selfish desires, and the one thing that we can only think about is relate to them. We see how all these horrible acts or these morally wrong acts are justified in some way or another. This collection deeply explores the tension between morality and desire. If we look into our nature, as humans, we are incredibly social creatures. We live and grow and create in populations, in societies. There are no human beings who live apart from society, or in the vast majority of cases. So, because we live in populations, we have created laws, ethics, religions, cultures, and even social expectations to ensure that there is peace within us, within all the individuals living in these populations. But beneath all these morals and all this civility, there is something hidden underneath. There is something that us as individuals cannot control, which is the hunger and the desire to have more, to make sure that our desires are completed and that we get what we want. There is something that haunts us, because there is a small part of ourselves that desires things selfishly, irrationally, and even sometimes violently, which is exactly what this book explores. When it comes to human morality, we see how human societies are built under moral structures. All cultures create systems that allows for human cohesion or for social cohesion. So, for example, we see laws against violence or rules against theft or against murder. We also see expectations surrounding honesty, more specifically within the people in power, but also with norms regarding loyalty and empathy. There is an expectation for you to behave that way. And these systems exist because without collaboration, humanity cannot survive. We cannot build a house by ourselves. We need the materials. We need people who actually help us build the houses. We need to collaborate in order to survive. That is a norm, and that is also an expectation. That is how humanity has evolved so far. We have collaborated with each other in order for us to build better. Without cooperation and morality, humanity as a whole would collapse, which is exactly why society severely punishes, not only legally but also socially, all these antisocial behaviors like violence, theft, murder, and all this stuff that is considered illegal. But what makes things complicated is that morality per se is not intuitive. It is not something that is born within us. It is something that is regulated, that depends on culture, but more specifically, that is taught by society to us as individuals. That is not something that we, once we are born, we know. We know how to be good and how to be evil because we have empathy in the vast majority of cases, but we don't know about morality because it depends on culture, and this culture is taught onto us. Because underneath all this social behavior and all this social pressure to perform morality, there is still this deep inherent primal desire to be selfish or to get our own selfish desires. And this is what this book understands very well, that it just because we are taught about morality doesn't mean that the selfish desires or this evilness disappears. What drives all the characters in this story is desire, not evil itself, or not villains or gods or average creatures that make you evil or that haunt you into evilness. What drives these characters is actually just straight up desire. And this is what makes these characters so painfully realistic, because all human beings are driven by desire. Either the desire to have money, to have success, to have status, or to be recognized, to be loved, to be considered beautiful. There are so many things that people desire and that we as humans desire intrinsically, or that is something that is part of our nature, that we cannot stop from ourselves from feeling and experiencing these desires. That is something that is painfully and intrinsically human. We as individuals all want to feel chosen. We want to feel special. We want to feel desired, not only romantically, but in general. And here is the key to evil. Because when someone has a desire, when someone wants something so passionately, so intrinsically that it haunts them, that is where obsession comes. That is where this obsession turns your morality off, turns all the social pressures and all the social conventions that you have been taught. When you desire something so much that it corrupts you, that is where evil starts, and that is where morality stops. And here is where you start rationalizing all these antisocial behaviors. You say things like, they deserved it, or they did something to me first, or I had no choice, that was the only choice for me to do, or I just really needed that thing, but I'm actually not a bad person. You start excusing all these terrible behaviors. More specifically, when all these behaviors are accompanied by an emotion or a feeling that you are sensing in yourself. More specifically, if this emotion is negative. So let's say emotions like jealousy, envy, or desire to be superior, or sense of inferiority, insecurity, humiliation, all these kind of emotions that are incredibly negative and feel terrible inside of us are the things that will motivate us to do something evil. This book constantly reflects the psychological unraveling, because people do not hurt others just because they are inhuman. They hurt others because they are going through this very deeply human emotion. And here is where the grotesque emerges, not in ghosts, not in monsters, but in deeply ordinary human behavior that is pushed beyond moral limits. The grotesque in this book comes from seeing recognizable human behavior or human emotions turn into cruelty and evil. For example, love becomes possession, or grief turns into violence. There are so many examples where we see all these very human and very recognizable emotions turn into antisocial and cruel behavior. And what is most unsettling is how painfully recognizable these emotions are, but also how much we can understand other people's behaviors, more specifically the behaviors that hurt others. Because at the end of the day, when you have a desire that is so intense that you cannot stop yourself from thinking or wanting to act onto it, you will do it no matter what. You will always find an excuse, or you will always find a way to do it. That is why people sabotage relationships, or they cheat, or they steal, or they do anything in their power. They manipulate and they control people and they blackmail them in order to get what they desire most. That is something that is incredibly human. And that is what makes humanity grotesque, because we are able to do unspeakably evil things, but still justify ourselves and consider ourselves as good people. We are just someone who had a lack of judgment. No matter what we do, or no matter how much we hurt people, we still consider ourselves as good. We have the desire to consider ourselves as not evil. But what makes this book so compelling is the fact that humanity is not only reduced to cruelty or evilness. We also see the tender part of humanity. We see the good eye. This book shows us the ability to see humanity for what it is, both tender and evil, both cruel and kind and good. We see all the sides and both sides of the coin. We see all the stories, we see everything, and we see humanity as it is, morally neutral. Because yes, humans are capable of doing terrible things. We see this in the news every day. But we are also capable of doing incredible compassion. In these stories, we see people caring for the dying, or we see people who love despite other people's flaws. We still care for people who we don't know. We have kindness, we have compassion, and we have altruism, even if we also have the cruel, insensitive, evil side. And the thing here is that all these acts of kindness only become meaningful because we are also capable of doing evil, because we have the knowledge of what evilness and what cruelty is, that we appreciate all these acts of kindness, all this compassion and altruism that we get from others. We can only appreciate the good because we also know the bad. Because without darkness, light does not exist. And this is exactly how we have to look into human morality. If we look into our culture or into our population, we see that there is no difference between good people and evil people. The vast majority of us will stand in between. Sometimes we will hurt others. We will be mean to people who do not deserve it. We will love and support each other. We will sacrifice ourselves for a greater being. At the end of the day, it doesn't matter what we do. It doesn't matter how much good we do. In some way or another, we will be evil. We will do evil things and we will be cruel. It's human nature. Before ending this video, I want to thank Penguin Random House Vintage for giving me the opportunity to read this book. This is a great exploration for desire and human behavior and the existence of good and evil. Generally, this has been such a fun read and so different to the vast majority of the books that I have read and I have reviewed here. So again, I want to thank Penguin Random House Vintage for giving me the opportunity, and for everyone who is wondering if this book or these stories are worth it, personally, I will say yes, even if I am getting, like, if I wasn't getting this collaboration and I was buying the book itself. I think this is a great read, especially if you want to get introduced into horror or if you want to explore the nature of human morality. This is definitely not a miss. That's all for today, guys. Thank you so much for watching and thank you for staying until the end. But before you leave, I have a question to ask you guys. What is the book that made you think about the duality of human nature or human morality? I am very interested in this topic. I have always been, and in fact, many of the books that I have read and reviewed are about this topic specifically. And obviously, after reading this book, I still have all these desires to read more about the duality of human nature. So if you have any recommendations or if you have any books that specifically talk about this topic, please make sure you put them down in the comments. I would love to read them and review them as well. But yeah, that's all for today, guys. Don't forget to like and subscribe this video or to my channel, and also make sure that you follow me on my social media. I post that every day. But yeah, that's all for today, guys. Thank you so much for watching again, and I will see you next week. Bye, guys.